Hello everybody, it's Mr. McKeever, and we're going to talk about the causes of World War I today. Alright, so this breaks down into this huge controversy that currently exists when it comes to historians. There are generally considered four main causes to World War I. Whether it's militarism, alliances, imperialism, or nationalism, everyone agrees that it's one of those four issues. Now, whichever one is the greater cause of World War I is still up for debate. In fact, even a bunch of people in our own history department, we argue about this back and forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to hit each one of these four, and then I'm going to leave it up to you to make your opinion as to which one you think is the biggest cause of World War I. Alright, so in any particular order you can kind of talk about these. You can talk about imperialism, you can talk about militarism as kind of responses to each other, but either way, heading into what will become the start of World War I, there are four major issues that Europe has to address. Imperialism, militarism, nationalism, and alliances. Let's address these each in an order that really doesn't have any kind of discernible reason for it. But first up is going to be imperialism. Now we've spent, the last week plus talking about imperialism. This is not something we're going to spend a lot of time on today. But the basic idea is that imperialism is taking place because countries feel like in order for them to feel important, in order for them to have that pride that is necessary for a true empire, they have to have colonies and territories around the world. And that pride drives them to go to Asia, drives them to go to Africa, drives them to go all over the place. Now, the problem becomes confrontation occurs in those places. When they do go to Africa, we see this with the Boer Wars, with the Dutch and the British going at each other because they want control over South Africa. Or we'll see issues with the Russians going over and attacking the Japanese and how that blows up in their face. Now the Japanese are an international power now. They do count in this whole, grand scheme of things. And while World War I isn't primarily in Asia, it is also fought over there as well too. We also have the Crimean War, which we've talked about, a couple times now. It has a lot of long-lasting consequences, whether or not that is the crippling of the Russian military and kind of that shattering of invulnerability that people felt, or really if it's the reshuffling of alliances that takes place afterwards. So we see confrontations across the globe when it comes to imperialism. And this is actually going to cause a lot of problems in that the European powers don't really trust each other. At any given time, pretty much every European power has, some issue with another one in regards to territories and colonies that exist around the world. So this is actually going to prompt, more tension. The powers that be don't really have, something to latch onto. So they're going to always constantly be trying to look for a way to one-up someone else, whether that's gaining a new colony or a new trade route or, in some cases, a stronger military. And this is where we're going to transition into militarism. This tank, on a side note, would not have been in World War I. You guys will kind of see examples of tanks, and they kind of lacked any sort of actual use, other than being just really imposing. Alright, so this is going to begin when it comes to Germany. Germany's unification is going to dramatically change Europe, and a lot of ways that not even Germany fully understand right off the bat. But the change in the balance of power is going to cause a restructuring as to what people think the right view of Europe should be. Prior to Germany's unification, there were three major powers. They were Britain, France, and even Russia, after the loss of the Crimean War, was still considered, this unstoppable giant, just, can be stopped if a lot of teams work together. And then we have a tier 2. This is going to be, major powers, but not, global powers. And that would be your Austria, your Prussia, Italy, which did unify, slightly before Germany did, and the Ottoman Empire, which is lucky it's still a part tier 2 right now. As you guys are aware, they've pretty much been confined only to the Middle East and have lost most of Africa at this point. Post-unification, there's two powers, Germany and Great Britain. The German military and the new power that it has with its larger, population, industrial base is really going to supplant both France and Russia as a major power. Austria is not doing well. The process of German unification really did take quite a bit from Austria in the 7 Weeks' War, and then France is really upset about the losses in the Franco-Prussian War. The loss of Alsace and Lorraine are catastrophic losses for their ability to produce stuff. Russia is, while really close to kind of the tier 1, tier 2 border, it still isn't exactly anywhere near the same strength that is Germany, and then you also still have Italy and the Ottoman Empire. Do take note, though, that countries like Spain aren't even in this grand scheme. Spain is so far off the map right now that they aren't going to play a major role in European affairs in the 20th century. But with Germany leading the way, things are going to be dramatically different. Russia is not okay with the notion that they are now a second-tier power, and in fact, they're going to go out of their way and try to improve their standing around Europe. And they're going to try to feed upon the Ottoman Empire, and while this failed once in the Crimean War, they're going to take another shot at it, and it's actually rather successful, and they will beat what is an even weaker Ottoman Empire and wrestle away huge chunks of Eastern Europe. And they do this as an attempt to, as they call it, save the Slavic Christians from the Ottoman Turks. While around Europe, people are starting to get alarmed as to what's happening with Russia here. Places like Britain are a little intimidated as to what Russia is. Remember, there's always this feeling that if Russia puts everything together, that no one in Europe can stop them. So Britain's paying attention, but for the most part, they're paying attention from a distance. Britain is not going to be extraordinarily active the late portion of the 19th and early 20th century in European politics. They're kind of just doing their own thing and making their own money. They're much more concerned with what's happening outside of Europe. And then outside of this, we also have Austria has a big issue with this too. These areas in Eastern Europe were kind of places Austria has really wanted for a long time. So we're going to have a lot of contention here. Russia and Austria are not going to get along. This is actually going to call Otto von Bismarck to, bring them all together. And, these are his allies, and particularly Russia and Austria are the two closest allies to Germany at this point. And in order to make sure that that alliance doesn't break apart, he calls the Congress of Berlin. And at this Congress of Berlin, he actually takes some of the land that Russia had won and gives it to Austria. And this is supposed to make Austria feel a little bit better. Russia still gained a lot of stuff. Their standing is probably now back in that tier 1 of national powers. But this is going to cause a lot of bickering back and forth. And really the only thing holding this alliance together is going to be Bismarck himself. And unfortunately for Germany, and really for all of Europe, Bismarck is fired shortly after this. New Kaiser comes in town, Wilhelm II, and he's much younger, and it feels like he has to have a much more hands-on approach as to how Germany is run. And him and Bismarck will start to disagree on how to run Germany, and this is going to end up with Germany really losing a lot of that luster that it had, that, Bismarck is awesome, you don't really want to mess with him. So Bismarck is tossed out, and everything starts to fall apart a little bit. The new leader of Germany, Wilhelm, is extraordinarily proud of his wonderful military, but he's also saddened by the fact that his navy isn't anywhere near that of the British. So his goal is to raise that navy as much as humanly possible, and it creates this aura of militarism around Europe. The fact that every nation needs to go out of their way and spend as much money as possible in order to develop the strongest military they humanly can to promote their own interest. So, this is going to lead to an arms race in Europe. We're going to see Germany massively trying to build a navy as quickly as humanly possible in hopes that this will allow them to really put themselves on the same footing as that of the British. They already have the strongest army in the world, and if you look at this wonderful chart here, the German army is without a doubt the largest army. It's also the country that spends the most money on its army in relation to its population. So this is huge. And that massive increase of the amount of ships that they have, and particularly submarines, is going to alarm the crap out of Britain. And during the same time period, they're also developing battle plans. If war breaks out in Europe, what will the Germans do? So they start developing plans that, we really can't afford to have a two-front war, as they called it, and that being, one front in France and one front potentially in Eastern Europe. So they developed, they called the Schlieffen Plan, this plan to just blitz right through France as fast as humanly possible in hopes of knocking France out of the war, much like they did in the Franco-Prussian War, and then turning their attention to Russia or whoever's in Eastern Europe that might be a threat to them. So this is going to be a big issue in Europe, and this is going to lead to our next two causes that are going to be an issue. But we're going to split that for the second video that you have coming up here. So with that, you guys have a wonderful day, and next time we talk about alliances.